All right. Well, fresh protests broke out across Greece today over harsh spending cuts that were a condition for its second bailout package. The 130 billion euro rescue package averts a chaotic default next month, but does little to calm fears about the country's long-term economic and social future. Now, Greece is the birthplace of democracy, but the harsh austerity conditions have some critics asking whether it's turned into a colony of the Eurozone. And now, the U.S. has little direct exposure to Greek debt, so the bailout means our economy is safe for now, but the financial crisis still looms large, and we may not be as isolated as we think. From our Greek counterparts. Well, for more on this, let's now turn to J.A. Meyerson, independent journalist and contributor to Truth Out. Jesse, how are you?
I'm really well.
Thanks for joining us. There's been a lot of discussion about how Greece is sort of a more extreme example of what's going on around the world, in Europe, and here. Talk about that. How so?
Well, it's not only a more extreme example of what's been going on here, but it's a more first world example of what's been going on all over the world. You know, the IMF and the sort of major international engines of neoliberal capitalism have been treating the developing world, the global south, this way for decades. You know, Haiti and Liberia and all these places that they presume to bail out, right, when they reach horrible fiscal conditions. But what that entails is huge cuts to, you know, social spending, a privatization of the commons, obliteration of labor, a huge, very sharp decrease in labor, in living standards and in wages. And this kind of thing has been going on all over the world for you know, in Africa and in Latin America and in Southeast Asia. And Greece is the first place that we really see a big first world economy, ostensibly a democracy, a robust middle class, white people, being treated exactly the same way as you know, the IMF and the World Bank and everybody else have been treating the third world for some time. So I think that has sort of brought it home in the United States. But you know, we see in Wisconsin and in Indiana and in Ohio attacks on labor rights. We see privatization of the commons here. We see a shifting of responsibility for the financial crisis from the people who actually caused it to the people who suffer most from it in the United States. And in Greece, because they can't pay back their debts, it's just turned into a much more extreme thing there, which is how come you see buildings torched in Athens.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's exactly what I want to get into. I feel like for those of us who aren't economic experts and don't sort of focus on the ins and outs of this, the word austerity sounds like some foreign term. But, you know, whether or not you think it's good policy or bad policy, it's essentially taking away services and spending less on things that people are used to, that results in ordinary people paying the price for an economic situation that wasn't necessarily their doing. And that's something that we've seen echoed right here at home in the Occupy Wall Street movement. If you could just sort of bring the Greece closer to our viewers, for our American viewers, to understand why there are similarities between what Occupy Wall Street wants and what Greeks want.
Sure. Well, I have some numbers here that I've written down. So this latest deal is $172 billion going not to the Greek people, but to the holders of Greek debt, which is, you know, Goldman Sachs and Deutsche Bank and all of the big, you know, villains of the world, plus $141 billion in debt write-down, going to the same people. And the conditions for this, and this vote is going up early next week, is a $530 million cut in pensions. So, you know, like grandma's going to be living on dog food, $225 million in health and education cuts, $661 million in cuts to the healthcare system. These are numbers that I can't even really comprehend, because I myself am not an economics expert. $754 million in cuts toward medicine. It's defaulting on the people, right? The country, the government, has this sovereign debt to big financial interests all over the world, and rather than defaulting on those, they've decided to default on their people. And that is a condition that cannot be upheld by a democracy, right? Demos means people, it's people power. And to that end, Greece, where, as you know, democracy started, has given up its democracy, has turned the government over to this guy, Papademos, who you know, is euphemistically referred to as a technocrat in the press. But what that really means is a banker. He's formerly a vice president at the ECB, the European Central Bank, which is the thing that controls financial policy or fiscal policy and monetary policy all over Europe. So Greece does not have sovereignty of fiscal policy, which is the way that most people deal with big, you know, situations of debt.
And Jesse, I'm
in
sorry
fact,
to
now
cut
they
you
don't
off.
even have an elected government.
I'm sorry to cut you off there. We're almost out of time, but very briefly, I mean, Greece is in a dire situation. The U.S. Might do certain things that seem similar. You know, we're talking about cutting certain services. We have bailed out large corporations, but it's not exactly at the level of Greece. How long could it take for us to get to that situation? Could we get to that situation where, you know, Occupy Wall Street is going to be rioting and protesting against actual dire cuts and not just discussions of these cuts?
The United States has a much bigger economy than Greece. Greece is a peripheral country in Europe, so there's very, very little danger that the United States will have to default on its loans, but that doesn't mean that the people in power won't use the situation in the United States towards the shock doctrine, right? Creating greater ease of accumulation of wealth for the already very wealthy at the expense of living conditions for the already very poor.
All right. Well, I think that's all the time that we have for that now. But actually, let's do one more question. I guess what's the biggest takeaway lesson here in terms of people who cause these financial crises not necessarily paying the price?
The biggest takeaway is that what the world faces now, and this is not just true in the developing world, but also in the extremely wealthy world, that what we need to do right now is exert all of our pressure on our ostensibly democratically elected governments to extricate themselves from the grip of the wealthiest financial interests, whose sole motivation is the infinite accumulation of wealth. That situation is incompatible with democracy, and we have to we have to claim our country for democracy.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jesse Meyerson, independent journalist and contributor to Truth Out.